morning, everyone, and welcome to our first session in the morning. And it's a tremendous honor and pleasure for me to introduce Professor Hughes, whom everybody knows, okay, so I'm not going to say much about him. And without further ado, the floor is yours. Paco.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for coming to this panel on humor and digital discourses. Can you hear me without the microphone, more or less?
Yes.
Right. So this is a continuation of the initial research that on incongruity resolution in humor, which is one of the most frequently mentioned strategies in humor, and fits relevance theory, which is the theory that I'm normally interested in. According to incongruity resolution, there are two phases in this process. The first phase is incongruity, in which, for some reason, in your inferential process or interpreting process, some clash or some incongruity turns up, and the resolution phase, which is very important, otherwise you end up puzzled instead of amused. Okay? So in my book, Humor and Relevance, I proposed cognition-centered incongruity on the one hand, and a discourse-bound incongruity on the other. The first one is basically the idea that we are building up a situation for the comprehension of the joke. We are simply trying to understand what's going on in the joke. That situation I called Make Sense Frame in that book. And this frame construction is automatic and stereotypical, and consequently very easy to manipulate, predict, and manipulate for humorous purposes. So it's basically a clash or an incongruity with the situation of the joke that we are building up. And secondly, a more discourse-based incongruity, basically having to do with ambiguities, playing with different reference for lexicals, or playing with whatever discourse-bound or discourse-centered incongruity. An example of the frame-based incongruity is this joke in which we start reading the joke and we build up a situation for the joke. The poor man is dying, and the loving wife in hospital with him, and he's confessing that he has an affair with some women and stole some money from her. So at the end she says, don't worry, I knew that already, that's why I poisoned you. So we have this clash with, oh my goodness, this is not the loving wife after all, it's the killing wife. So that's, there is no actual playing with words or anything, it's more to do with the building up of the situation that leads to an incongruity. And an example of the second one is typical joke in which a policeman stops a lady, and then he says to her, you should be wearing glasses, and the woman says, well, I have contacts. Obviously, everybody understands contact lenses, and then at the end he says, I don't care who you know, you're getting a ticket. So we immediately, after all, we understand that the contacts may also mean influential people. So that's basically playing with ambiguities, reference assignment, concept, adjustment, whatever. I also distinguished two positions for the source of the incongruity in the setup of the joke, initial introduction or preparation of the joke, which often demands some kind of backtracking, going back to some previously inferred or understood item, and actually this one is an example of that one, because we understand context, and then at the end of the joke we realize that it's not that contact lenses after all, so we have to go back to context again and reinterpret the word differently. So this one, and then another position for the source of the incongruity in the punchline at the end of the joke, in which we find an incongruity. Normally we have to add some implications, some personal implicatures that solve the incongruity somehow. And I also propose three types of resolutions. Discourse-based. If there is an ambiguity, we have to find some kind of resolution based on the ambiguity, selecting a different sense for the word, or selecting lexical or whatever. Frame-based, in which we have to change the situation that we have been building up in the joke, as in the that's why I poisoned you thing. And also implication-based resolution, in which the key to the resolution lies in getting some implicators which are not in the text, but allows us to get some implicators. So what I did is I combined all of these parameters, and I came up with 12 categories for incongruity resolution based on those premises. Okay. So what I thought is okay. Let's do something similar with means. Okay. Let's see if we can come up with some categories as well. I'm not claiming that we have to find the same similar categories, but basically try to group them into incongruities resolution patterns. Okay, so I collected 150 samples of means randomly, and so what I came up with is basically I distinguished 3 types of incongruities. One is frame-based, that's like jokes, playing with the situation of the meme, with building up a proper situation for understanding the meme. Second, discourse image incongruity, in which there is an inferential clash when inferring from the text and the image, so there is some kind of opposition or clash. And then discourse-based incongruity, again like in the jokes examples that I mentioned. And also I came up with some roles of the image in incongruity resolution. Either the image plays no role at all, and so the text carries all the load of the humorous effects, or the image aids in incongruity resolution. It's not really essential, but it helps to get the humorous effects intended, and the image is essential in incongruity resolution. So if we combine these, we come up with 7 cases. Notice that frame-based and discourse-based have a typology of situation: image no role, image aids, or image is essential, except this one, because obviously if image is essential, because it clashes with the text, it cannot play any other role than being essential. Okay? Talking about percentage, predictably, almost 40% of the memes fitted one way or another the 4th type, discourse image incongruity, which is predictable because we are talking about a multimodal discourse. And then second, it was frame-based, and surprisingly only slightly more than 20% of the memes exhibited some kind of discourse-based or purely discourse-based incongruity. Okay, so the first thing I came up with is some memes that do not seem to be using incongruity resolution at all. Okay, so like 8 and something % of the memes did not seem to exhibit. Well, you could prove me wrong, but I find no incongruities. For example, in the first one, Maggie Smith battled cancer while filming the last Harry Potter movie. She carried on not wanting to disappoint the fans or something like that. So some of the memes did not really exhibit incongruity resolution, probably because there is no humorous intention in the first place. So then we have the first one. The first one is frame-based, in which the image plays no role. Okay? So we have things like those memes in which the image is obviously irrelevant, but a guy walks into a bar, we immediately build up the situation that some kind of joke is coming up, and then.
Sorry for the interruption.
Okay. So you can see that. Can you hear me better now? Better now? Yeah. So you can see that the image plays no role whatsoever. And so at the beginning of the text, we read a guy walks into a bar when we think it's going to be some kind of joke, and eventually it's not. Or the second one, in which we get some figurative thing about sky's the limit, and then we get a more literal interpretation. The second one is frame-based, in which the image helps, or the image aids in the image and the incongruity resolution. So we have this kind of meme in which the text at the beginning is reinforced by the picture of the meme. So we have this woman saying, "I'm a strong, independent woman, and I don't need a man to take care of me," and she's, you know, like a very angry woman. Or the one on the right, I demand equality between men and women, and then the text at the bottom invalidates all the situation we have been building up. No? The woman deserving and claiming respect, and so, or the girl in the middle, you know, the kind of girl that, you know, typically hippie-looking, saying, "Okay, we want equality for everybody. All religions are okay except Christianity." So we have this incongruity, which is aided by the picture. Okay. And obviously a series of memes like the brace yourself in Game of Thrones, in which we have a congruity between the image and the initial text, and then we get an invalidation with the bottom text. And then we have these kind of memes in which the image is not compatible with the first text, with the top text, is compatible with the bottom text. So we have an incongruity resolution. In the case of the one on the left, the continuation of the text is really strong, but, you know, seeing that it is this actor that plays revenge films and stuff, we can get some congruity after all. Or the one on the right, in which suddenly the guy is offering drugs to the girl, but obviously being the guy that acts in Breaking Bad series, when we can understand. Okay, so the image aids in getting some understanding of the clash between the top text and the second text. Okay, so that's frame-based, and the image helps somehow in the incongruity resolution. Then we have this frame-based image is essential, either because it helps to widen the gap between the top text and the bottom text. For example, in the one on the left, we have this, what is best in life, and we see the picture of Jesus and the followers, and then we have this bottom text, which is completely incongruous or, you know, or puzzling. And so we see the picture of Jesus, and we really need it for getting a stronger clash between the top text and the bottom text. And the ones on the right, on the other hand, helps us understand the contrast between the top text and the bottom text. No? We need Donald Trump to understand why, who's offering 25 million jobs, and the one at the bottom, to understand why a person may die but not die, no? Harry Potter. And then we have the fourth one is the one in which the image really, there's a clash between the image and the text. So we have this first initial category, which is plain discourse image contrast, in which, for example, you can see join the Marines, they said you'll be a hero, they said, and with the guy holding an umbrella, so we get this clash between the information coming from the photograph and the text, or I'm hungry, but I already brushed my teeth, and you can see the weeping girl, which is again, it's a contrast, it's a clash between a normal, I would say a normal clash between text and image. However, we can have some other categories like irony in the series of laughing girls. It's a whole series of memes with laughing girls. And then I said I'll be ready in 5 minutes. Or then I said I don't care about your money. I love you for who you are. This, that kind of in which the image triggers an ironical interpretation instead of a literal one. So it's a whole series of irony triggering memes. And then we have a very nice category that I call second order incongruity related to the initial image context. Now the idea is that we have many memes have instances of snaps or stills from films or TV, so they are then reintroduced in the meme. So what I mean is that on paper there's not a high incongruity between the image and the text in the meme. But since we know that the image comes from someplace else, some other place in the film or the TV, we feel that there's got to be an incongruity between what the text and the image are communicating and what the image in the film might have communicated in the first place. So, for example, we have this image which is taken directly from a film, okay? The Rock, okay, I think it's called The Rock or something, yeah? And then we reintroduce him in a meme, okay? And then we have a second order incongruity, because obviously there is no real clash between the guy and the text when somebody adds another plate to the sink while I'm washing the dishes. Okay, so there could be that kind of a threatening look, but we know that it comes from a different context in the first place. So we know there's a clash, probably not with the meme itself, but with the initial context. Oh yes. One?
No, 5.
5, okay. Right, so we have examples like this, in which in theory there is not an intense clash between text and image, but we know that these stills come from films on TV, etc. So we know that they're not really matching up, do they? Okay. Then the fifth one is purely discourse-based incongruities. In the first category, the image plays no role. A book fell on my head. I can only blame my shelf. Okay? In which it doesn't matter what picture we put in it. It could be anybody. The incongruity would still be found. Okay? Algorithms at the bottom. So we have similar pronunciation in this series of memes, in which the image plays really no important role. We have word ambiguity in Virgin Islands, and then planes and plane in the one on the right, which have word ambiguity. Also, the image seems to be playing no important role. Okay, and we have phrase ambiguity, Big Bang, get high. But I found fewer examples than I expected. Okay, I thought this course base was going to be huge in memes, but for some reason I found, that's 80% only of the memes. And then we have the second category in which the image plays a role of aiding, helping. For example, this guy's face on the left helps us understand beat as hitting the woman, and then at the bottom we get the softer option and version. Okay? So the guy with this threatening look aids in inferring one of the senses of beating, okay? Which is invalidated at the bottom part of the meme. We have can't, and the image of can't also helps, or handle, in the ambiguity of handle. Then we have all the series of the Nasty Wolf series, in which all phrases have a different meaning, like what's the fastest way to a woman's heart, through her rib cage, or having fast food with joggers, etc. So we have this nasty wolf series in which the wolf indicates, or it's pushing you in one inferential direction instead of another. And then playing with homophony or phonetic similarity, we need we need the photo of the North Korea guy or Macron. Finally, we have this word essential, image essential memes in which the image is really important. For example, the Muslim guy on the left. It's important to understand unmarried women should be covered as should be wearing clothes and not show lots of flesh. Okay, so it's essential to get the initial understanding of covered, only to be invalidated at the bottom when it says by health insurance, fuck the Republicans or whatever. The second one needs no explanation, and it's too current, again we need so we have some, obviously we could, I guess there are some borderline cases in which we could argue whether the image is aiding or helping or is actually essential. But on the whole, I think that most of the 7 categories that I came up with the distinctions between image essential or image helps or image is essential, or plays no role, I think they can basically cover the, well, at least the 150 memes that I analyzed. I guess it could be extended to a much larger corpus of memes. Okay, thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for a really, really interesting and very funny conference, okay? And we do have time for questions and comments. I'm sure there will be many. Okay, here we go.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was enlightening because I love memes, but I simply do not know how to operate them. And thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much again. And the classification is amazing, and I think it's very useful, but to me, it's so hard to classify memes because even though I try to be aware of everything that is going on, there is so much subtext, not only in the image, but also in the text sometimes. And for example, with the case with the velociraptor, I've seen this velociraptor a lot of times, always with these kind of essential questions, but really silly questions. So I wonder if using the velociraptor might actually frame everyone into this, okay, this is going to be a silly but deep question at the same time. So then maybe the image does help a bit, even if it's just...
Yeah, it could. Yeah, you mean that you could set the inferential path somewhere, no?
If you know the meme, if you know...
Okay, it's a velociraptor, so it's going to be whatever, no? Yeah,
yes.
in that case, yeah.
Like when you have the baby...
About actually getting a role in the incongruity itself, but I guess it facilitates inferential, that's for sure, yeah. So it's not for free, but it's there.
But that's amazing.
Yeah.
There was another question here. You can pass the mic, please.
I'm sorry I was late. I didn't hear the beginning. Thank you for that. Just one thing I'd like to say is, possibly, and Christy Davis is turning in his grave, very possibly memes are now replacing the traditional joke form, in that younger people, many of whom are in here, are more likely to swipe and forward and share than stand up and perform a joke. Secondly, I have a bit of an issue with the unimportance you give to the image with respect to the verbal text. As this person said before me, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, and the whole work of Limo Schiffman on memes, especially her more recent stuff, where the image macro is essential, and the image macro, which is the image without the words, precedes the words. So if one of these young people in here goes on to a meme generating site and decides to make a meme, or as my students do, make memes of me, I become that macro. And that macro has significance, after which we can apply all the different verbal categories that we like. But even the very first one where you say that the image is not essential, oh boy it is. And I'm too old. I think the younger people in here would be better than me at explaining what those images are.
Well, the first question is clearly part of the, what Van Dijk talks about, the culture of connectivity, the fact that we are constantly eager to be acknowledged, and I send this macro and then I get some reward in terms of replies and reactions and stuff. So I get this is part of the need to be connected and be acknowledged and be part of the group and be, getting these 15-minute famous stuff that we all need. Concerning the second, I agree completely. The thing is that I was basically thinking in purely incongruity resolution terms, which is, okay, what is the clash? And do we need the image for the resolution of the clash? But obviously, she was right at the beginning saying that some inferential path is favored by simply identifying the picture, which of course it is there for a reason. Okay?
May I just say two little tiny things? Facebook is investing so much money into people working into algorithms that eliminate verbal altogether, whatever that means.
No, that's
and I know people working there being paid outrageous sums of money. Secondly, have you considered the so-called millennial memes? Millennial memes, which are purely image. What do you do with those?
Well, I guess you can work with expectations. You can work with background encyclopedic knowledge about the picture and how they are invalidated in different contexts. But they are recontextualized. But they are every time you send them and they are reprocessed and reinterpreted, they are recontextualized. So somehow there's got to be some kind of reimagining of what they mean, what their role is in the first place. Yeah.
Sorry, there is another question, and then maybe a quick comment if we have.
My question is going to be very quick because she started talking a little bit about it. I was going to ask you about the newer millennial memes, as she said, because it is true that image is like a very important thing in our memes nowadays, in the way that we first get this kind of meme and then we just stop using the text and start using only the image, and everyone knows what the text is going to be about. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it's kind of what she said. Like, for example, maybe the one that you put right behind you. God, I don't know how to explain it. But yes, like, are you ever going to investigate or talk about these kinds of memes that are appearing now with like our generation and stuff that has no text at all, but everyone understands it, like just image memes and stuff? Or is it
obviously
because it's also very pragmatic?
It's a necessary next step. Concerning the role of the actual scene, the image, it has been demonstrated that there is no uniform interpreting path of a visual verbal text of discourse. That's you can predict that the image is going to stand out from the text, but you know they had this laboratory analysis with eye tracking, and they found out that some people concentrated on the text at the beginning and then moved into the bottom part, and some people simply were impressed by the photo and then okay, let's move on to the text. So there was no uniform processing path. Okay, so that adds another complication to this classification because some incongruities are based on a specific linear processing of text and image, which might not work for other people. Okay,
but I am talking about this very it's also kind of similar to what she who was the first one who asked the question. Yes. Sorry. That she said like the fact that the picture is known by everyone. Textual is already putting you in the setting of okay, this meme is going to be like this.
That's
to
correct.
The point where you don't really need the text because you already know or you can feel with your head what the meme is going to be about.
You get your inferential process in a certain path because you identify a family of memes, and that obviously triggers some inferential processing in the first place. So that I agree completely. But what I mean is does it play a particular role in the incongruity resolution? That's another issue. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm terribly sorry to be a killjoy. So it was a very thought-provoking discussion. I'm sorry, but maybe we can continue it during the coffee break later. Thank you, Paco, very much for this.
Yes, so, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope it's working. It's working. Okay.
It's not working. I don't think it's working.
All right, so I'll be seated at least for the beginning. So you can see the title of my presentation actually is Humor About the Internet and Social Media. So I don't exactly fit into this the schema of this panel, which is, but well, it's at least a little bit related to the topic, I hope. And specific aims of my talk are to find an answer to the question if there is some common pragmatic mechanism employed in various types of humorous discourse, such as stand-up comedy, jokes, sketches, which are all themed on one topic like internet and social media addiction. And if such a mechanism exists, how it is utilized in these various forms of humorous discourse. I would like to present you an example. Okay, what's going on? All right, yes. So here's a, sorry, because it's, right. This is a fragment from Michael McIntyre's, I hope you've heard about this British comedian, his stand-up routine. He's talking about his and everyone's phone addiction.
But it wasn't so long ago, okay? Many people in this room will remember this, that we used to not have mobile phones. And it wasn't such a panic when we left the house. We didn't used to leave the house and go, oh, I don't think I can leave all this stuff behind. I'm going to need it. Can you open the boot? I'm going to need to bring all my encyclopedias. I might need to look something up. I'm going to bring some board games. Is that all right? I'm going to take some board games. Every photograph I've ever taken, I'm going to take all of those. My A to Z, my ordnance survey map, all my record collection, my entire... I'll leave the back seat as well. All right, I'll take that compass. Oh, and the torch. That's fine.
Okay, so don't forget the torch. Yes, next time you're leaving. And here's another very short sample. This time it's from Tracy Ullman's sketch, so a different genre, but a similar topic.
I've had a lucky life, but there's something I really regret.
Oh, Mum, there's nothing to regret.
I really wish I'd taken more pictures of my lunch and put them online. Chicken and chips, take a picture, put it on.
Who doesn't? Anyway, one of the comments on YouTube under McIntyre's show was this. I'm watching this on my phone because I have a phone addiction. So I think that clearly this comment captures the situation, that it's like ridiculing a situation that everyone is this way or another involved in. So, well, the question is, I already hinted at that, at those inferential mechanisms or paths underlying this kind of humor, which capitalizes on everyone everyday experience. And, well, so putting the performance, of course, which is also crucial here, and the props aside, what is this mechanism? So taking into consideration that many people nowadays rely on various forms of modern technology. This is not amusing itself. There are many kinds of addictions which are not amusing either. So what makes it such a good object of laugh and ridicule? Well, as far as stand-up comedy is concerned, it has been discussed by Francisco Hughes. Well, definitely one of the pragmatic mechanisms involved in generating a humorous effect in stand-up is the realization that someone's assumption, which was previously held as a private assumption, turns out to be collective. So each of us holds a certain belief about our own behavior, but in this joint experience during a stand-up show, everybody realizes this is everyone's experience. But in fact, when it comes to humor about internet addiction, so well, it can be assumed that this belief is widespread already, because we know that everyone is addicted, but this assumption is very likely to be strengthened when it becomes mutually manifest during the show. Well, of course, I won't be very original if I say that another possible candidate mechanism that is at play here is incongruity, because what else can you expect to be there in humor? But if yes, then what are the incongruous situations or scenarios? If, as we said, everybody does it and everybody knows that everybody else does it. And is there any incongruity resolution? If there is, what does it involve? So to explain this, or at least to try to, I will start with presenting what is known about the possible status of assumptions represented in the human mind on the relevance theoretic view. So there are many fine and nuanced distinctions. I'm not able to address all of them, but the one most crucial to my claim is that there are private beliefs which are represented only in specific individual possibly for a short time, and there are cultural representations which are lasting and widely distributed beliefs which have a mental version in almost all members of a community. This definition is a paraphrase of Sperber's definition. So keeping this in mind, let us also note that, well, much humor relies on the recovery of implicatures or implicit content. And, well, once again, in the framework of relevance theory, implicatures are believed to come into two categories, namely implicated premises and implicated conclusions. So, implicated premises, briefly speaking, are those assumptions which are retrieved from the hearer's memory, and they are actively employed in producing the output of processing, namely implicated conclusions. And as was noted by many scholars, most notably Francisco, implicated premises may be, and very often are, those cultural representation types of assumption that I mentioned in the previous slide. And there is a very good reason for that, namely, such cultural assumptions are, well, one can be certain that they are shared. Humor is about sharing, and it has to rely on shared assumptions. And moreover, such cultural representations are not only shared, but they are also very easily and effortlessly accessible to everyone. So the humorist can rely on the accessibility of those cultural representations. Now, for a moment, I would like to jump to work by Giovanantonio Forabosco, who analyzed incongruity as a general mechanism in humor comprehension, and he posited that what makes a stimulus, verbal or otherwise, humorous or potentially humorous when it is incongruous or it diverts from some cognitive model of reference. So in other words, every hearer has some cognitive model of reference in their memory, and the incoming humorous, potentially humorous stimulus is compared against this cognitive model of reference. And I would like to claim that these cultural representations that, as we said, are used as implicated premises in humor comprehension, they play this role of the cognitive model of reference with which the humorous stimulus is compared. Now, so what can we say about those cultural representations that are used as a cognitive model of reference with which the input is confronted? It has been observed in studies on irony, and this is a very important notion in the relevance theoretic model of irony, that cultural representations used in processing ironic utterances display normative bias. There was an experimental study by Kreutz and Glucksberg that proved this hypothesis right. So actually what happens, it was discovered that those cultural representations display a bias of a positive type. So it is generally believed, it is believed in a given culture that children should be good, marriages should be happy, people should be hardworking, rational, and do useful things, and so on and so on. So these are not necessarily assumptions about the reality as they are held, but these are assumptions about the reality as it should be. So why is it even possible to complain using an ironic utterance? It's possible to complain only if you have these positive expectations, because if you didn't have any positive expectations, why complain? We all know, for instance, the divorce rate is very high, yet we wish the newly married, good luck and happy life, because we still have these expectations, however naive they may be. I don't have a lot. I tried to find some psychological research that would really, you know, substantiate this normative bias issue well. But I must say I didn't find any like hard data that would something that would be definitely prove normative bias. I found some research on optimism. This is like a digression. I will not talk a lot about optimism, but I think there might be a connection about this general dispositional optimism of human beings. So I'm not citing this research here for lack of time. Instead, I would like to refer to one observation put forward by Grice, who also, as we all know, he was a rationalist and he believed very strongly in rationality. So I think that's one of those positively biased assumptions he attributed to human beings generally. For instance, when he said, okay, when my car broke down and you see me trying to fix my car and you approach me, then my assumption, my rational assumption is that you are probably trying to help and that you are competent in helping. Once you think about it, not necessarily. Why not just stare at what other people are doing? So this is this like discrepancy between positive expectations and the reality are also illustrated here. Okay, so putting all these things together, so what could be those cultural representations which are activated in the processing of this kind of jokes about the internet, those cultural representations that display positive normative bias? These are probably as follows. So people should do useful things. People should not waste time. When you are not doing anything immediately useful, why not read books? I mean, you know, artistic literature or high quality. How about technology? Well, as you know, it was invented and it is intended to foster the development of civilization rather than, for instance, spread memes or cut videos. So, and we should also notice that these assumptions, I do not insist that each of these assumptions is specifically represented in everyone's mind, because it's more like a general tendency to think, you know, that your thoughts go in this direction. So I would say that such assumptions they tend to be weak and indeterminate. Here I follow the work of Maria Jodłowiec, who postulates that assumptions used in humor processing generally tend to be weak and determinate. So there is like this cloud of assumptions that we rely on, and they may not be very highly determinate. Now, if we confront it with research on real-life applications of the internet and what it is really used for. Francisco uses a recent paper, and you can also see the research cited in this paper. There is much evidence that a lot of internet communication is in fact fatigue in nature. So it gives rise to fatigue effects rather than informative effects. And many of these effects are even non-propositional, so it would be very difficult to say what is communicated in this kind of use of the internet. So I think that if we put all these things together, we can identify the source of incongruity in those internet addiction-themed jokes and sketches and stand-up, like the clash between the cognitive model of reference, which in our case are those positively biased cultural assumptions about what humans should be like, about what technology should be used for, and the behavior which is actually presented by those comedians as ubiquitous in the humorous text. Is this incongruity resolved? Because in humor we might expect incongruity resolution. And in fact, incongruity resolution or the resolution of contradictions is very much discussed within the relevance theoretic framework, and it is normally posited then when a hearer encounters two contradictory assumptions. The stronger one wins over and the weaker one is eliminated. In, let's say, in a default situation without any reference to humorous communication. Well, for Rabosco's view, the same paper that I mentioned before, incongruity in humorous discourse also tends to be resolved either by accommodation, that is doing something with the cognitive model of reference, or assimilation, assimilating the input to this cognitive model of reference. But in the same paper, Rabosco also acknowledges that humor has so many forms that the incongruity may not always be resolved, or the resolution is sometimes only partial. And it seems to me that in the case of the internet-themed humor, the resolution is only partial, if any. Why? Because the cultural representations which were used as the cognitive model of reference don't seem to get eliminated. So if we are confronted with a humorous text ridiculing this behavior, like, you know, taking pictures of your lunch and posting them wherever, it does not really eliminate those cultural assumptions that this is something we should not do. We should take pictures of, you know, historical places in Alicante, for instance, and retain them in you know, some rather than pictures of lunch. So these assumptions won't be eliminated. This cognitive model of reference still holds, right? So it seems that this incongruity lingers on, possibly being the basis for the next jokes, next sketches and stand-up routines about this subject. Okay, so a few conclusions. Well, it seems that incongruity, which has not been so far discussed very systematically, for instance, with respect to stand-up comedies within relevance theory, it can also be found there. So, well, it's not a hugely perhaps innovative observation, but it seems that incongruity can really be found in all types of humor, stand-up comedy included. But, of course, it manifests itself in different ways on different levels of humor production and comprehension. In jokes, there are also many jokes themed on the internet addiction, so there might be like double incongruity within the joke and on this more general level between the actual behavior and social expectations. So in relevance theoretic terms, this kind of incongruity that was discussed here can be accounted for in terms of a clash between cultural representations, used here as implicated premises in the processing, and the content of a humorous text. Well, it seems to be that this mechanism of normative bias, it definitely requires more investigation, but at least it appears that it can be extended. It is actively used not only in irony processing, but also in at least some types of humor. So this kind of, you know, the discussion about the similarities and differences between humor and irony has a long tradition, as we all know. So maybe this is like a, you know, like a tiny contribution to this discussion as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnieszka, for a very interesting talk and thought-provoking as well. Thank you for not letting me do the 1 minute thing. And we do have time for questions and comments. Yeah? Did we have time before? Oh, we don't have the microphone anymore. Oh, yes.
I don't know. It's here, but I wasn't using it. Just make sure it's working, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the lovely talk. A quick remark and a quick question. For the normative bias thing, that's better. Yeah. For the normative bias thing, I highly recommend you to read Jonathan Haidt's Righteous Minds, People Divided by Politics and Religion, book of 2012. He's collecting data from 2012 to now. He's a moral psychologist of the New York University, And I think he kind of managed to completely defeat the rationalist delusion. I mean, the incongruity model have a lot of flaws, and this is one. It was like 7 years ago now. It was one of the first steps to put a really dent to it. And a quick question. We have basically a collective intelligence on Jung terms, forming up in real life, commenting social media, and on social media connecting the real life. And yesterday in Beirut, for example, a lot of protesters were painting their faces like the Joker, in the last movie with Joaquin Phoenix. So did you see a convergence between the two, when the behavior in real life with the technological development will kind of become social media behavior and otherwise? Even, for example, I don't know, in China, they're already putting up the kind of marks on people. If they are like good-natured, they use humor well, they are well-behaved or not, again, for the normative bias.
Yes, I mean, well, definitely, it's not like a question, yes, but so I can only... Yes, but I can only... Yes, I can only acknowledge your point. Of course, that this is like the phenomenon is of course much broader, right? So I only managed to scratch the surface and
like you know, we all do.
Yes, and then it's possible to build up on this observation. So thank you very much for pointing this out.
If you want, I can give you kind of.
Yeah, I definitely. Yeah,
thank you.
Question.
Another question, sorry.
Can you hear? Yeah. Well, I don't know what it is, but I'm just going on from what you said and what he said. I was just thinking, I was eating last night in a place where the food was presented on slates, okay? And I took a photograph. I haven't had time to post it yet, but we have a world where we have these plates that are kind of, and the food goes all off it. This is not meant to be humorous, but anyway, have you noticed how now in shops you get these slates, people are taking these slates home, and we're beginning to eat off slates. Not me, but people are. So what Nikita, I think, was trying to point out, and maybe what you were trying to point out as well, is how we're straddling these two worlds, and what things that are happening in that world are coming into our world. And the example that you gave about the Joker before, and the example of the plate. Do you see where I'm going?
Yes, absolutely. So surely there's and these cultural representations, they are stable for the time being, but it's of course interesting to look forward to the future, right? Because this is like, and it's not a new topic itself, because like a lot of people have pointed out, there is those representations are constantly addressed by humor, challenged by humor, and they are also influenced by humor in the long run. So it's like interesting to see this process.
And linking up to Paco's talk before, we could kind of say that these images are part of a collective intelligence, if we want to sort of quote Pentland, yeah? Jung, okay, thank you. Jung and Stan corrected. Jung and more recently Pentland, okay? So we have this kind of collective intelligence that we recognize that slate as something that belongs to us and other people. Let's share it. I'm cool, you know.
Yeah. Okay, that's another question again.
We seem to be keeping it here. Sorry. I'm thinking about this issue of normative bias, and I think it's a very old notion, given how to use the words of interconnectivity and globalized and all that stuff. There isn't, I don't think, a normative bias among the community of internet users. I think when we talk about normative bias, we used to be talking about this in terms of very cultural specific things, and I don't think we have any culture-specific normative bias when we're talking about this. You know, we are citizens of the internet, or whatever you want to call it. And so, much though I take a point about normative bias, it made a lot more sense to me in the days that we were talking about the satirists like Swift, or even satirists up until the 21st century, where there was kind of the shared cultural normative bias, and I think that's gone. Possibly.
there are all kinds of, of course, normative bias is norm relative, and there are all kinds of norms, and I'm not saying anything specific about them, so they can be like local, they can be global, and I also emphasize that this kind of norms are highly indeterminate in the sense of this, like general direction of some expectations that people are cooperative, mean well. So they are not like. Of course, you can distinguish like more local norms, which are community specific, and possibly the internet users can be thought of as a community as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any more questions or more comments? We have a couple of minutes. Yeah, I know, but that's my function. I'm supposed to ask.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just switch it off so that it doesn't bother
so
anyone. And you can see this beautiful...
Change rooms if you're interested. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's already 10 o'clock. So we're going to start our last session in this first panel of the morning. And it's a pleasure to introduce Vili Tsakona. And her colleague is not here, Argyris Arhakis, and she will talk about online humor as a response to the migration threat. So the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel, and unfortunately Argyris couldn't make it to this beautiful place and conference, so I'm going to make the presentation by myself. The aim of this presentation is to discuss the online Greek jokes concerning the migration crisis. The jokes will be investigated in view of the social contradictions created by globalization and massive movements of people on the one hand, and the national and racist discourses prevailing within contemporary nation-states of the Western world on the other. In particular, we intend to argue that the jokes examined and quote the nationalist and racist resistance against multiculturalism and multilingualism resulting from the arrival of migrants at Greece. In this sense, humor aims at maintaining the homogeneity and monoculturalism of the Greek nation-state, as it appears to draw on and align with discriminating discourses dominating the social media and the public sphere in general. Therefore, this study adheres to critical humor studies, investigating how humor may reconstruct and perpetuate social inequalities here in the form of stereotypes, xenophobia, and racism. In Western nation-states, multiculturalism and multilingualism are conceived as problems rather than resources which could enrich and enhance communication. Monoculturalism and monolingualism are imposed through various institutions which construct and deliver the national homogenizing discourse. This discourse attempts to delimit the nation, to eliminate its internal differences, and to present it as a pure entity with linguistic and cultural coherence within its state borders. Despite the strong impact of national homogenizing discourse, very often different languages and cultural groups coexist within the borders of a single state. A crucial factor undermining traditional boundaries is globalization and the ensuing mobility. People from different origins are in a permanent state of motion towards various destinations for various reasons. Migration has massively taken place since 1990 and drastically contributes to the development of a globalized landscape where strict ethnic and language delineations have become fuzzy. In order to face such a threat, the European nation-states put forward racist discourses and attitudes which seem to be one of the most efficient means for the achievement and the maintenance of linguistic and cultural homogeneity, as well as for the denigration of ethnic minorities within contemporary nation-states. Van Dijk perceives racism as constituted by social practices of discrimination and relationships of power abuse by dominant groups, organizations, and institutions, which are all based on socially shared and negatively oriented mental representations of us about them. Power abuse against minority groups takes the form of racist views perceiving the cultural difference between majority and minority groups as a weakness on the part of the latter. Moreover, racist views justify and rationalize such an unequal treatment of minority groups for as long as these groups do not conform to the dominant cultural norms of the majority. Consequently, migrants are forced to marginalization unless they assimilate themselves to the host community. Despite the fact that crude manifestations of racism in the Western world are not uncommon, we should not overlook the humanitarian and anti-racist values of tolerance and acceptance of difference that are in wide social circulation nowadays. As Van Dijk maintains, liberal democracies in Europe and the US have increasingly adopted laws and norms that presuppose or guarantee equality between majority and minority populations. As a matter of fact, in the Western world, extreme racist behaviors are usually hindered or banned, and verbal racist attacks have acquired a mitigated form and are often produced via disclaimers such as "I'm not a racist, but," "I'm not against black people, but," "all migrants are not criminals, but," etc. The same could be suggested for the creation and circulation of racist jokes, which may more or less mitigate or disguise their denigrating or aggressive effect and meanings through laughter and the creation of a light-hearted context. Thus, while the covert and fanatic hatred deliberately circulated in the public sphere may not be officially tolerated, a new liquid kind of racism is attested. Greece is no exception to all this. Due to recent geopolitical changes, millions of migrants have moved towards Greece the last 30 years. The first 20 years, Greece received migrants mainly from the Balkans. The last few years, Greece has received mostly Muslim migrants. These migrant populations were faced with an intense national racist discourse. Due to their cultural and linguistic differences, migrants have been perceived and represented as an abnormal and suspect community, as a security risk and an existential threat to the Greek nation-state. Suspicion and xenophobia have been the most common reactions of Greek people towards migrants, forcing the latter to assimilate if they wish to be accepted by the former. In this context, our goal is to show that the online Greek jokes examined here are derivative of racist discourse and reproduce discriminatory ideologies and practices. Critical research in humor targeting the cultural or religious other investigates, among other things, how and why such humor reproduces and maintains social discrimination and inequality, how humor subverting racist stereotypes may eventually reinforce and naturalize them, how and why the generic conventions of humor genres do not incite the audience to think critically of their content, what kind of rhetorical strategies are employed by the producers of racist jokes to mitigate their aggressive content, how discriminatory humor may force the target group to assimilate to prevalent social norms, etc. Here I will briefly refer to those few studies which pertain to the current migration crisis. Line, Este, and Vulaid examine online humorous data targeting migrants as dark-skinned people threatening light-skinned ones, and as people whose religion poses incongruous restrictions on common practices, such as eating pork and drinking alcohol. The exclusionary racist attitude is also expressed through humorous texts questioning migrants' contribution to state economy, accusing them of stealing local jobs and mistreating women, as well as through depicting them as foreign invaders and dangerous bombers. As Line, Este, and Vulaid suggests, such humor is an integral part of the public debate on the migration crisis and reflects speakers' political standpoints on this topic. The threatening dimension of the refugee crisis for Western nation-states and the latter's inability and eventually indifference to help migrants are highlighted in political cartoons. Ozdemir and Ozdemir demonstrate how the metaphorical representation of migrants as waves or floods underscores their destructive potential for the security and socioeconomic stability of Western nation-states. Political cartoons bring to the surface the inadequacy of international organizations and institutions to solve the problem of massive migration movements. They also criticize the inaction of Western governments and politicians as far as the crisis is concerned, and their exclusionist attitudes towards migrants. It therefore seems that humorous texts referring to migrants ever since the current crisis began tend to align with dominant discourses and representations of migrants as dangerous invaders threatening the monoculturalism and homogeneity of Western nation-states. Obviously, humor cannot remain unaffected by widely circulated nationalist and racist standpoints and practices which aim to maintain the sociopolitical status quo. Quite on the contrary, understanding and disseminating such humor presupposes at least familiarity with such standpoints and practices. Jokes are a performative form of communication that requires a receptive audience. The present study is based on a collection of Greek jokes and memes concerning the migration crisis. The jokes were either sent directly to our personal email accounts by friends and relatives or downloaded from online sources. It is important to note here that despite our best efforts, the corpus examined is a very small one, only 28 jokes. We have not been able to collect more migrant jokes, even though Greek speakers are usually prolific in producing jokes concerning current social or political affairs. Given that our perspective is a critical one, we will try to identify the negative attitudes and stereotypes against migrants attested in these jokes. To this end, we will employ the general theory of verbal humor, in particular the target and script opposition knowledge resources. The first one involves the persons, acts, institutions, etc. denigrated through humor. The second one will allow us to trace why migrants are perceived by Greek speakers as incongruous. In other words, what are migrants' attributes or actions that seem unexpected or abnormal and are hence rejected by the Greek majority? Our first step was to determine the target of each joke, namely the entity denigrated via humor. Interestingly, it seems that migrants are not the only target in the corpus under scrutiny. The Greek government and extreme right-wing ideologies and practices are also ridiculed in these jokes. More specifically, the majority of the jokes denigrate migrants. Some of them denigrate both migrants and the Greek government. Two of them target extreme right-wing ideologies and practices against migrants. And one joke refers to migrants to target exclusively the Greek government. Due to time limitations, here we will concentrate on the first two categories representing the majority of our data, 25 jokes. Moving on to the script oppositions attested in these jokes, it appears that two overarching script oppositions can be identified in these 25 jokes. The first one is Greece should not accept migrants so as to maintain its sovereignty and cultural homogeneity versus migrants invade the Greek territory, threatening the Greek sovereignty and cultural homogeneity. And the second script opposition is Greek culture is superior versus migrants' cultures are inferior. In some cases, these two script oppositions co-occur. First, let's see some examples representing migrants as invaders violating the Greek borders and threatening the sovereignty of the Greek nation-state. A Pakistani migrant is supposed to have won in this joke a huge amount of money at a lottery game and is considered by one of the biggest and most notorious for its bad living conditions refugee camps near Athens. The incongruity mainly evolves around the fact that migrants are not supposed to become estate owners in Greece, thus menacing its sovereignty and cultural homogeneity, but also around the fact that instead of buying a beautiful and luxurious house somewhere in Greece, he prefers one of the most notorious refugee camps as his home. In this sense, the joke represents migrants not only as unwanted invaders, but also as stupid, that is, inferior. Cultural invasion is emphasized in this meme as well. March 25th is the Greek Independence Day. Greeks celebrate the revolution against Ottoman Turks, which began in 1821 and resulted in Greece becoming an independent state in 1830. Every year on that day, a military parade still takes place in the center of Athens as part of the celebrations. In this joke, it is implied that in a few years' time, actually next year by now, Arabs on camels will replace Greek soldiers after the former's military and cultural invasion in Greece. As a result, Greeks would be forced to leave their homeland, as this joke suggests. This joke refers to a decision of the Greek Ministry of Education to make swimming courses compulsory for Greek school students. This decision is incongruously justified as an attempt to prepare Greek students to abandon the country and go live somewhere else after the migrant invasion. The second overarching scriptoposition involves the incongruous inferiority of migrants and their cultures. This joke provides instructions on how to find an empty seat at the metro. More specifically, it suggests that instead of asking for a seat or wait for one to become available, one could pretend that he or she is a Muslim suicide bomber and start praying in the metro wagon before sacrificing oneself as part of a suicide attack. This will force all passengers to evacuate the metro wagon to save their lives. The joke is based on a rather common, at least in the Western world, stereotype portraying Muslims as dangerous, inhumane terrorists and thus denigrating them. This joke also denigrates Syrian women in particular. Syrian women are portrayed as behaving incongruously. Instead of trying to save themselves from the bombs, they supposedly had sex, and when they arrive at Greece, they are either pregnant or mothers with newborn babies in their arms. Such an irrational and promiscuous behavior is attributed to them to represent them as inferior. A clear rejection of Muslim religion and culture appears in this final joke. Please take a moment to read it. It is translated from Greek. The Muslim passenger is represented as too demanding, irrational, uncultivated, and impolite, and as trying to impose his own religious beliefs and cultural practices on the Greek taxi driver. The latter's reaction indicates that in his view, his passenger's culture and religion are inferior to the Greek ones. Muslims are supposed to be culturally underdeveloped and backward, as they still use camels instead of cars or taxis, and they do not appreciate Western music. Consequently, they do not deserve to use the services provided by the Greeks. To sum up, Greek jokes against migrants portray them as foreigners who invade the Greek territory and threaten local people, while at the same time their culture and practices are inferior to the Greek ones and hence would rather be rejected. Therefore, the jokes appear to align with widespread racist discourses dominating not only the Greek public sphere but also those of other Western nation-states, which perceive migrants as dangerous for their security and cultural homogeneity. And some conclusions. Migration has massively taken place since 1990 and drastically contributes to the development of a landscape with loose ethnic and linguistic delineations. As a result, European nation-states put forward racist discourses to face such threats and maintain linguistic and cultural homogeneity. It is exactly in this context that the online jokes examined reflect the nationalist and racist disapproval of multiculturalism and multilingualism as expressed after the arrival of migrants in Greece. These jokes appear to be part of the nationalist response to the migration challenges against the Greek national order. Our study was based on a limited corpus of 28 jokes that was compiled since 2014. Given that our approach adheres to critical humor studies, we identified the negative attitudes and stereotypes against migrants attested in these jokes, disclosing their racist quality. Thus, we employed the target and scriptoposition knowledge resources introduced by Etardo in the general theory of verbal humor. We found out that the majority of our jokes denigrate migrants and are built on two main scriptopositions resulting from the following stereotypes. First, migrants are invaders threatening the Greek nation-state and culture, and second, migrants are culturally inferior. Due to such perceptions, migrants should not be accepted in the Greek territory and by the Greek majority. Despite our efforts, our corpus remained a small one. This probably means that the jokes under scrutiny are relatively scarce and not in wide circulation. In our view, the simple but not innocent answer to the question why migrant jokes are not numerous and in wide circulation in Greece is related to their social functions. The dominant Greek national discourse seems to be so pervasive because of its entrenchment through education and the media that the support offered by these jokes is not crucial. Given that the homogeneity and monoculturalism of the Greek nation-state remain unquestioned, Greek people still seem to feel quite culturally and ethnically safe and assume that their national rights are not under real threat by the recent arrival of migrants. On the other hand, as already mentioned, aggression and denigration against the cultural or religious other are nowadays disapproved of and sanctioned, so many people tend to mitigate their expressions of hostility or rejection against migrants, and such anti-racist norms may account for the limited size and popularity of our corpus. In their effort to avoid being characterized as racist, Greek speakers refrain from massively reproducing such humor. Finally, a feeling of superiority, threat, shame, insecurity, or other, shapes Greek people's social relationship with migrants. In order to investigate this in more depth, we need not only humorous data, but also Greek speakers' actual reactions to or perceptions of such humor, for example, online posts or comments on such humor, so as to be able to determine exactly which feelings towards migrants are expressed through such denigrating and racist jokes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Santana, for your talk. And we do have some time for questions and comments. Yes, good. The microphone. Here you go. I don't know if it's on. Just check the button. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you for that talk. I would just wanted to comment on the example about the crowded metro. So you said the target for that was still the migrants. To me, that one reads as the targets are the people displaying the racist attitudes, because it's kind of the assumption is, they've made the assumption that you're, going to bomb the train or whatever, and then kind of the migrant comes out on top.
Yes, that would be a valid interpretation. I know we've thought of this, but still the representation of Muslim migrants is a very negative one. They're represented as terrorists which place bombs in metro wagons.
Yeah.
So, yes, it is also targeting, it could be targeting the local Greek people as well, but the representation of Muslim migrants is still a very stereotypical one.
So if it was a different speaker, I suppose if it was a migrant speaker, it's like a reclamation. But
a meta-stereotypical use.
Yeah, I'm trying to see the best in the speaker there.
Any more comments or questions? Yes? Over there? Oh, sorry. See you. No, it's okay.
Well, just a quick remark, because my PhD thesis is going, on the same topic, but in a different direction. Basically, all of your jokes, 28 jokes, were united by disgust towards the migrant. Have you ever considered to kind of go in the direction of the emotional context of the joke, not only on the pure incongruity? And have you looked also at the class dimension, which kind of, in my data, around 40,000 tweets, kind of emerged quite clearly that there is a class dimension and an ethnic disgust. So poor and migrants actually all sometimes in the same category. And the crowded metro joke was a thing there. So basically it's not we the Greeks, but we middle class Greeks. We don't want poor and migrants. What do you think about that?
I would like. I would
to sum up. First, disgust. Second,
yes, disgust. I think that it would be more interesting to investigate disgust through the comments of real comments by real speakers. Yes, to see how they perceive these jokes, because my guess, but I cannot be sure, is that they won't find them disgusting. The majority of them will find them accurate and true.
There is a comic disposition. There is a disposition towards disgust, let's say. So basically, I make the joke to not appear offensive, but I won't still signal my disgust towards these people. If I depict somebody on a camel,
okay, now I get
say
it.
that.
Okay, yes. I think that this could be more clearly investigated through real reactions and not through just, an analyst perspective. Because, okay, they may be disgusting, or they may express Greek people's disgust towards migrants, but it's we could tell it for sure through the other side. And the second question was?
The class dimension. Basically, we have working class people, middle class people, and the elite. So basically, the hate towards migrants nationalized between, I will simplify it immensely.
I don't think that in Greece in particular, the stereotypes against migrants is a class thing. I think that it permeates all the classes, all the social classes, from lower one to higher ones. So it would be interesting to investigate this aspect as well, but I'm not sure how to do it. Yes, but I don't think that there are differences between lower classes, middle classes, or upper classes in this respect. This is my.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Professor Tsakona. I was just wondering, I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I think that reminded me immediately what you said on what Christy Davis presented about jokes as thermometers of reality, actually than just having a racist purpose only. Because while you were commenting on that, I was looking at those wonderful jokes, so wonderfully translated. I'm obsessed about translation, and I'm laughing at them. I mean, I found them funny, and not necessarily. It does not necessarily mean to say that I'm a racist person, just because I found them I found them witty. So I don't know if you maybe you're talking obviously with all your knowledge on Greek reality, but I think that nevertheless providing them this aura of racism, or them defining that Greek people, or racist Greek people, are going to support this kind of jokes. Firstly, maybe we should even wonder if they are going to understand them to begin with. Depending, what I'm trying to say. So I don't know if this kind of jokes are just describing how things are at a given point in time in history. I don't know if these kind of jokes, precise jokes, existed before migrants arrived, and probably they are everywhere. So it's just like so. I don't know, how do you feel about that? Being so positive about this is about racism, because racist people quite probably are going to say things not funny and even worse than that, just to elaborate on what they want to say from the political point of view. I don't know if I'm making my point clear.
Actually, we agree with Christy Davis here that they are thermometers, measuring what is happening in the Greek public sphere the last few years. And since Greece has received migrants since the 90s, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, now, our next step would be to compare these jokes with the previous ones. And this is a spoiler, but I have to, I can say that there are differences. The scripts and the script oppositions are different. And I think that this has to do with the conditions in Greece. We are facing a severe financial crisis. Back in the 90s, we live in prosperity, even fake prosperity, but in prosperity. So the scripts are very different. So even though there were migrant jokes back then, targeting migrants and then expressing a feeling that we don't want them to be here, the scripts were different. We didn't want them for different reasons. More in my next presentation.
Just out of curiosity, again, the thermometer thing, before these jokes came in, did you have, like we have in Italy, a southern target? Or
No.
Or northern or southern?
No, we have...
In England, in Britain, it's the north.
No, we have stupidity jokes like... No, about Black Sea Greeks, Pontian Greeks. And we also have dialectal jokes, targeting those who do not speak standard Greek. But we do not have north-south jokes.
Because in Italy, memes now, but before, jokes used to be about Neapolitan Sicilians, sorry, Salvatore. And generally the South, who were disgusting and dirty and didn't wash and all the rest, and now they've been replaced by...
Yeah, once they had asked me if we have jokes about the Muslim minority in Greece, you know, in Thrace, but I've never heard of such a joke. We didn't have jokes about minorities before. So at least, as far as I can tell, before the migrants arrived in the 90s.
I'm afraid the time's up, and I'm sure you want to go for a coffee as well. So
thank you very much for being
so
here.
Much for your time, for your